Today we're going to do a little bit of a comparison-contrast exercise. We're going to be comparing the new AI guidance from the New York City Department of Education, which was released yesterday, March 24th, to what we know thanks to a Chalkbeat article released just the day before about how schools had been moving forward with their use of AI and policies around it in advance of the guidance that was released yesterday. Now, the guidance took more than 2 years to develop after there was sort of a stop-start motion from the DOE when GPT was originally released and it was banned across schools. Some schools within the district went ahead and built policies. Some went back to paper and pencil for their writing, for example, and some were left flat-footed and did nothing at all. And so you could imagine kind of three buckets roughly: the proactive, the reactive, and the passive. So proactive, we'll take a look at Eastside Community Schools committee-drafted policy as an example of a more proactive, community-oriented approach that values the ethos of the school in its application of AI. The reactive, Beacon School, shifting admission essays to in-class writing and going back to paper and pencil. And then the passive, teachers who were just sort of flat-footed had no backup plan, according to the article. They really didn't know what to do. And I think we may see three different perspectives emerging as we talk about this. One, improvisation, schools that are taking the lead on their own accord. Two, inequity, the uneven distribution of access and opportunity. And three, some isolated heroism. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew. Welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily. We're a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. And full disclosure, I do use AI as a thinking partner in developing these episodes because I think the best way to talk open and honestly about AI is to use it openly and honestly. So let's talk about the implications of this comparison-contrast exercise between the policy and the reality of the last couple of years. I mentioned equity, and I think that is perhaps the headline here as I look at this situation, is that you see a huge disparity in the range of responses to the situation absent the guidance from the DOE. So if you were able to receive guidance from your school was really a function of how capable and how motivated the administrators were, whether you had a union-trained teacher perhaps, or an administrator who was willing to undertake the work to build a policy. And that reflects the lack of guidance at the DOE level. And this is, I think, symptomatic of what happens in such a situation where you have pressures to move forward, but you lack an umbrella sense of guidance. In one case, there was an example of Brooklyn Collaborative, which developed a traffic light system, which I thought was an interesting reflection of what the DOE then has released in their red, yellow, and green guidance of when AI must not be used, when it might be used, and when it's encouraged or teachers are encouraged to use it freely. And that kind of model developed at the school level may well have led to the sort of reflective policy at the district level. I think another implication here is that there is a persistent gray area problem. And I think we've seen this show up in a lot of places with regard to AI implementation across districts, across schools, within classrooms. It isn't always clear whether the AI is being used in a way that's acceptable. It's not such a question of yes or no, did you use AI on your essay? It's more a nuanced question of, can AI suggest sources? Can teachers use it for feedback? What are the consequences if students were using it but didn't perhaps even know it? And I think the Chalkbeat article is showing that there are schools really wrestling with this issue because they're in the thick of it. And I think that raises some of the questions that we talked about with Tony Frontier's book, which I've been referring to a lot, AI with Intention, and the idea that the assignment that the teacher is making and the effort that the student is putting in and what the student considers the assignment to be may not all be aligned. And the student may use AI for areas of the assignment or the assigned work that they don't think is actually the crux of the assignment. And therefore, they may be in violation of a policy without really understanding transparently what they're being asked to do. And I think the last implication that I'll mention for now is that the student perspective really matters. And I think the Chalkbeat article did a good job of capturing some of the student perspective. For example, an 18-year-old named Jeremiah Dickerson at Williamsburg Charter Charter was making I think one of the sharpest points in the article. He's talking about this conundrum that we all face is that if you're banning AI and everywhere you go as a student, you're not allowed to use it, what is the role of the school in preparing students for what's next? That is, the world outside the school is going to be using AI, and if inside the school that use is prohibited, then how does that play into the school's function to prepare students for what follows school? I think that's a dynamic situation and question that we're wrestling with in the moment, and you can see that in the article. So I want to leave you with 4 practical takeaways. So first, let's take the teacher's perspective. There's an interesting sort of silver lining to the reactive posture of the teacher who went back to paper and pencil. And her testimonial in the article was that she really felt like using writing in that way and going back to paper and pencil, she got to know her students better. And that, I think, is a valuable insight that it isn't all negative consequence to move away from AI. I would say what the article doesn't mention is that handwriting and typing essays are not the same, and that the research is clear, I think, that handwriting is better for capturing, for note-taking, for capturing content information, moving it from short-term to long-term memory, and that kind of encoding that one does when they're manually manipulating a pen. But when it comes to fluency in writing and when it comes to the quantity and quality of revision, it's been shown that handwriting is actually going to produce shorter essays and fewer revisions. So trade-offs there as well. I would say second takeaway for school leaders in this case, the East Side community model I mentioned before, they started with values instead of starting with the technology or with the rules. They really went back to what are we about as a school? And what they conceived of was that deep learning requires unsupervised AI-free work because that's at the essence of who they are. And I think it's a great way to assemble your thinking around your identity and your core values. I'd say the third takeaway here is a caution that the AFT's AI Academy is a good strategy, and it is reaching teachers who are helping to build instructional and institutional knowledge where they go. It's a good motion, but and I think it highlights the importance of professional development in this moment, but it's inadequate because it is by nature, teacher to teacher, person to person. It takes too long to be able to effectively reach every teacher and smooth out some of the inequity in the ability of educators to move forward in this moment instead of waiting too much for guidance from the DOE. And I think the practical takeaway right now is waiting to see, as this policy in this 45-day comment period hits schools across the DOE, how will this policy interact with the work that schools have been doing over the last 2 years, and how much of it is going to create friction and how much of it is going to stabilize the environment, leading to greater equity across the DOE and greater opportunity for more students and more teachers to explore AI with intention. That's the big question. We don't know the answer. We're going to stay tuned and continue to watch this play out. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.